The air inside Ada County Courthouse felt heavier than any hospital shift I'd ever pulled. My name is Avery Collins. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my 20s would end like this, sitting in a courtroom with my family on one side and the truth in my hands. The benches creaked as locals settled in, murmuring about the sisters' case that had made its way through Boise gossip circles for weeks. I sat at the plaintiff's table, shoulders straight, one palm pressed against the envelope that could either ruin me or save me. It was thick, swollen with a decade of papers, text prints, and receipts. To me, it wasn't just an envelope. It was 10 years of bedtime stories, emergency room shifts, rent sacrifices, and whispered promises. Across from me, my older sister Jenna Porter looked sharp in a tailored navy blazer, her blonde hair pulled into a bun that screamed control. Beside her sat Stephen Hart, her attorney, radiating corporate confidence. They didn't look like family. They looked like a brand new lawsuit packaged in perfume and cold steel. Jenna's lips curled slightly when she caught me staring, a silent reminder that she held the biological title of Mother. The judge entered. Judge Calvin Brooks, gray hair combed back, his black robe crisp as he slid into the chair. His gavel tapped once, a sound like thunder cracking through my ribs. "We are here to address the custody claim filed by Mrs. Porter against her sister, Miss Collins," he said, his voice steady, "and to examine matters tied to the Maple Street property." At the mention of the house, a ripple went through the room. Everyone in Boise knew about that house. Brick, 3 bedrooms, sitting on land our parents had bought back when property in Ada County was barely worth fighting over. Now Zillow put its value at $300,000, a golden ticket in a rising market. That house had become both refuge and battleground. Hart rose smoothly, stating that Jenna was reclaiming her children unlawfully withheld. He never looked at the 4 teenagers sitting behind me. Ryan, 18, his jaw clenched tight. Claire, 16, clutching a worn choir ribbon. Esther, 14, staring daggers at the table. And Noah, 12, his hand squeezing mine before I even noticed he'd reached forward. They weren't just names. They were a life I hadn't planned for but couldn't let go of. When it was my turn to speak, my throat was dry, but my voice found a rhythm. "Your Honor, 10 years ago Jenna left her children at my door. 1 hour, she said. She never came back. I raised them. I paid for them. I loved them." I lifted the envelope just enough for the court to see. "And I can prove it." Judge Brooks leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Do the children know what's inside that envelope, Miss Collins?" The question pierced deeper than any cross-examination. My pulse thudded in my ears. I looked back at Ryan, Claire, Esther, and Noah. Their eyes were steady on me, but their bodies were tense. They trusted me, but they didn't know everything. Not the note Jenna had scribbled on a rainy night. Not the texts demanding money in exchange for silence. Not the video I'd seen but never shared. I swallowed, forcing steadiness into my words. "Not yet," I said. The room stilled. It was as if every breath had been drawn in and forgotten. Even Jenna's smirk faltered for a second. "Not yet." 2 words that opened a canyon of questions. What had my sister hidden? What would my evidence reveal? And what would it cost the kids to hear the truth spoken aloud under oath? In that silence, I felt every eye on me, not just the judge and the attorneys, but the locals whose whispers had carried our story from grocery lines to church pews. They wanted blood. They wanted drama. But more than anything, they wanted to know what was inside that envelope. I tightened my grip, my knuckles pale. For 10 years, I'd carried this weight alone, shielding the kids from betrayal sharper than any knife. Now, in this courtroom, there was no more shield, no more secrecy. The gavel tapped again, signaling the beginning of testimony, but in that moment, all I heard was the sound of my own heart breaking open. It was 10 years ago, a day carved into me as sharply as if it were tattooed on my skin. Boise skies had opened without warning, sheets of rain hammering the rooftops of Maple Street. I had just brewed coffee, its steam curling through my tiny bungalow, when the doorbell shrieked. The sound wasn't casual. It was frantic, like someone pounding on a fire alarm. I opened the door and there she was, Jenna, my older sister, drenched in a hooded coat, her lipstick smudged, eyes darting around like prey already cornered. And behind her, 4 children clung to the shadows. Ryan, only 8 then, with a backpack sagging low enough to scrape the porch. Claire, 6, clutching a stuffed bunny that looked as if it had soaked up half the storm. Esther, 4, her shoelaces untied and her tiny jeans rolled unevenly. And Noah, barely 2, strapped in a stroller, his cries thin and exhausted, his fists balled against the thunder. Avery, I need you, Jenna said, shoving a diaper bag into my chest. Just an hour. I swear. I blinked, stunned. What? An hour for what? Where are you? But she was already moving, her coat flapping behind her as she darted down the steps. The car engine roared to life, headlights flashing through the curtain of rain. The last thing I saw was the spray of water as her tires tore away. I stood on the porch frozen, the diaper bag heavy in my arms, the rain dripping onto my slippers. My coffee still steamed in the kitchen, but my house felt suddenly too small, too loud, too unprepared. Ryan's eyes, wide and weary, met mine. "Where's Mom going?" he asked, his voice as fragile as his soaked backpack straps. I brought them inside. Claire's bunny dripped across the rug, Esther tugged at my sleeve asking for juice, and Noah's cries grew into full sobs. I was 28, a certified nursing assistant used to emergencies, but nothing in the ER had prepared me for this kind of chaos. Kids weren't like patients, they weren't temporary. I dug through the diaper bag hoping for guidance, but all I found were a few snacks, one spare outfit for Noah, and a crumpled half-pack of wipes. No note. No instructions, just evidence of a hasty escape. I handed granola bars to the older two, poured milk into mismatched cups, and rocked Noah against my chest until his cries softened into hiccups. Claire curled into the couch, clutching her soggy bunny. Ryan sat by the door, eyes fixed on the streetlight outside as if Jenna's car might come back any second. I called her. Once, twice, 5 times. Voicemail every time. "Jenna, where are you?" I whispered into the phone, careful not to scare the kids. "They're here. They need you. Call me back." But the hours ticked on. The storm refused to let up. The house smelled of damp coats and peanut butter sandwiches hastily made from my pantry. I tucked them all into my guest bed, Ryan and Claire on one side, Esther curled against Noah's stroller blanket. I sat by the window, watching the street, waiting for headlights that never came. By dawn, I found it. A note, buried at the bottom of the diaper bag, folded into a wad under the wipes. The paper was thin, the ink smeared, but Jenna's messy scrawl was clear enough. "I'll be back soon." Thanks, A. Soon. That word clawed at me. Soon could mean hours, soon could mean days, or soon could mean never. I looked at the kids the next morning, cereal bowls clinking against my chipped kitchen table. Ryan stared at the door. Claire still clung to the bunny. Esther babbled about cartoons. Noah reached for me, his tiny hand warm against my wrist. In that moment, I knew soon was a lie. Jenna wasn't coming back. Not then, maybe not ever. And the truth hit me harder than the rain ever could. My life had just been rewritten without my consent. The girl who once dreamed of night classes and a quiet apartment was gone. What stood in her place was something else entirely, a stand-in mother forged overnight in a storm. Morning blurred into weeks, and weeks hardened into a rhythm no 28-year-old ever anticipates. My bungalow on Maple Street, once tailored for quiet nights and textbooks, now groaned under the weight of 4 children who had been dropped into my lap like forgotten luggage. It wasn't just space that shrank, it was time, money, and the dreams I once carried. The first mountain was school. Ryan and Claire needed to be enrolled immediately, or questions would start. I marched into the district office, clutching the birth certificates Jenna had stuffed in the diaper bag. My palms sweated as I explained I was their aunt. The clerk raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but when she saw no guardian listed, she finally stamped the papers. The relief that flooded me felt like I'd won a war, though really, it was only the first battle. Ryan clung to my hand that first morning at Hawthorne Elementary, his voice barely audible. "I miss my old school." I crouched down, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "This is our new start, Ryan. You'll make friends." Claire skipped ahead, a burst of color against the gray morning, her damp bunny hidden in her backpack like a talisman. Esther was too young for preschool, so I leaned on a sitter from the hospital network, a retired nurse named Betty Coleman. Noah, still in diapers, spent my off days strapped to my hip as I folded laundry or boiled spaghetti. My life became a constant shuffle, work nights at street, Luke's ER, nap in the afternoons, then re-emerge as the mother I never signed up to be. The thrift store on Main Street became our boutique. Ryan picked a blue jacket, 2 sizes too big, muttering, "Will we have money for this?" I ruffled his hair and lied. "We do, kiddo." Claire twirled in a flowered dress, her laugh momentarily lighting up the musty aisles. Esther pointed at tiny jeans with sparkles, while Noah gnawed on a rubber toy from the dollar bin. That night, I washed everything twice, folding them like they were spun from silk. At home, the kitchen transformed into a classroom. Ryan battled fractions at the table, frustrated, his pencil digging grooves into cheap paper. I leaned over, explaining math like I explained medication doses to patients, my voice calm even when my eyelids sagged from double shifts. Claire drew pictures of our house, always bigger than it really was, with smoke curling from the chimney like we lived in a fairy tale. Esther stacked blocks in crooked towers, knocking them down with shrieks of laughter. Noah banged pots with wooden spoons, a baby percussionist without an audience. It was chaos, yes, but it was ours. Bills stacked like bricks. Groceries swallowed paychecks. My pension plan, once designed for a single woman's modest life, evaporated into peanut butter, milk cartons, and utility bills. Coffee shops, new scrubs, and little luxuries disappeared. I learned to stretch casseroles across 3 dinners and used coupons until cashiers knew me by sight. In those moments, I became a statistic hidden in Idaho's social fabric. Studies later confirmed it. Kinship care, in this state, quietly outnumbers licensed foster homes. No headlines, no funding boosts, just a silent army of aunts, grandmothers, and siblings holding the line where parents had stepped back. I hadn't signed a contract, but I had joined that army. The kids kept asking about Jenna. Ryan's questions were sharp, the kind a boy shoulders when forced to grow up too soon. When is Mom coming back? Claire wrote crayon cards for holidays, begging me to send them to Jenna's last address. Esther, blunt at 4, once sobbed, "Mommy left because I was bad." That night I held her until she fell asleep, whispering, "No, sweet girl. You are perfect. Adults just break in ways kids don't cause." And then there was Noah. Too young to understand, he called me Mama by accident one morning. The word slipped out like a knife disguised as a gift. I didn't correct him. I hugged him tighter, hiding the sting behind a smile. Philosophy found me in the exhaustion. Love isn't some lightning strike of passion or blood ties. Love is showing up. Love is saying yes every morning, even when you want to scream no. It's the peanut butter sandwiches at midnight, the thrift store jackets, the long walks to school. Love is built, not inherited. And somewhere in that blur of leftover food and leftover furniture, I realized the truth. I wasn't just their aunt anymore. I was the only constant they had. The calendar pages didn't flip, they blurred. What began as emergency caretaking evolved into a decade of rituals, sacrifices, and small victories stitched together like a patchwork quilt. I was 28 when they arrived. Now I stood on the threshold of 38, weathered by night shifts, defined by responsibility, and tethered to 4 lives that had grown up in my orbit. Ryan blossomed first. By middle school, his eyes sparkled with a scientist's curiosity. I still remember the night he barged into the kitchen, slamming a shoebox on the counter, wires sticking out in all directions. "It's a volcano, but with lights," he explained, cheeks flushed with pride. I stayed up until 2 a.m., helping him wire the bulbs, my ER scrubs still clinging to the scent of antiseptic. He won 2nd place at the science fair, his smile radiant as he posed with a ribbon he'd pinned to his jacket. Claire was the songbird. She joined choir at 12, her voice trembling at first, then swelling strong enough to fill the creaky walls of our house on Maple Street. On evenings after practice, she'd perch on the back porch steps, strumming an old guitar a neighbor had donated. Her voice became the soundscape of our lives, her songs echoing over spaghetti dinners, her laughter harmonizing with Noah's soccer commentary from the living room. Esther carried defiance like a badge. At 7, she stomped into the living room wearing thrift-store ballet shoes, insisting she'd teach herself if I couldn't afford lessons. I scraped together overtime pay for a local studio, hiding receipts under my mattress, pretending the money came from some magical reserve. She spun across the kitchen tile, her movements awkward at first, but determination sharper than hunger. By 14, she was rehearsing routines that drew cheers at school recitals, and Noah, the baby who had called me Mama by accident, became the anchor. Soccer cleats, grass-stained socks, trophies he polished with spit. His grin was gap-toothed but steady, his trust in me absolute. Each time he dashed across the field, I thought of the stormy night he'd arrived, fists clenched against the rain, and how far we'd both traveled. Ordinary miracles, stacked in the mundane. But the cost? Immense. Money evaporated faster than I could earn it. My hospital paychecks bent under groceries, school supplies, dance lessons, soccer registration fees, and endless medical copays. I sacrificed retirement funds, vacations, even my own health at times. My social life shrank into late-night phone calls with Betty Coleman, my former co-worker who never let me drown alone. She delivered casseroles, folded laundry, and reminded me, "You're not failing, Avery, you're holding the line." Our community quietly stitched itself into our story. Pastor Wilson lent his church van for field trips. Mr. Dominguez, our neighbor, fixed the roof in exchange for pizza and heartfelt thanks. Moms from school brought hand-me-downs, whispering, "You're stronger than I could ever be." Boise might be a mid-sized city on a map, but in our pocket of it, we lived like a village still mattered. The questions about Jenna lingered, sharpening as the kids aged. Ryan grew old enough to see through my softened answers. Claire still sent drawings, her hopes stubborn and childlike, even when mail bounced back marked undeliverable. Esther exploded once, slamming her notebook shut. She left because she didn't care. Noah only knew her as a ghost, an empty word, a shadow in photos. Philosophy became my quiet refuge in sleepless nights. Parenthood, I realized, isn't about who gives birth, it's about who stays. Love isn't genetic obligation. It's 1,000 tiny sacrifices performed without applause. I thought about kinship statistics again. In Idaho, thousands of relatives shoulder children without official recognition. We were part of a hidden economy, our love currency never counted by the state. On my worst nights, when the walls creaked louder than the laughter, I'd stand in the hallway, peeking into each room. Ryan's textbooks stacked like towers. Claire's choir ribbons fluttering from her dresser, Esther's ballet shoes tied to her chair, Noah's soccer ball tucked under his pillow. The house was messy, loud, and never still, but it was alive. Ordinary miracles aren't televised. They happen when the electricity bill is paid just in time, when the peanut butter jar stretches 3 days longer, when a child finally smiles after weeks of worry. They don't trend on social media, they don't attract applause, but they build a world stronger than greed or abandonment. And in that world, I found an identity I hadn't chosen but had grown into, one that was stitched together with sacrifice and sealed by laughter. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that begins with burnt toast and ends with laundry piles. I'd just come home from a long shift at Street Luke's, my scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Ryan was at the kitchen table finishing college application essays. Claire was rehearsing a song, her voice drifting through the living room. Esther and Noah were sprawled on the floor with a deck of cards. The house hummed with its usual chorus of routine when a knock split the calm in half. I opened the door, and there she stood, Jenna Porter, my older sister, my ghost. She was unrecognizable from the woman who had vanished in the rain a decade earlier. A tailored blazer clung to her frame, hair styled into an immaculate bun, makeup sharp enough to cut. She looked less like a mother returning and more like a realtor about to close a sale. Beside her stood a man in a gray suit, briefcase in one hand. "Mrs. Collins?" His tone was formal, but the smirk beneath it betrayed condescension. "I'm Stephen Hart, representing Mrs. Porter." He handed me a stack of papers so thick my wrist bent under the weight. "You've been served." And the words slid into my stomach like lead. Custody petition, estate matters, unlawful guardianship. Phrases written in bold black ink, each one a dagger. The kids froze at the word custody. Ryan's pen slipped from his hand, ink blotting his essay. Claire's song cracked mid-note, her eyes wide. Esther dropped her cards, whispering, "Is she taking us?" Noah clung to my arm, silent but trembling. Jenna stepped forward, her perfume too sweet for the moment. "I want my children back," she said flatly, as though reclaiming a rental property. She didn't even glance at them, her own kids, now teenagers staring at her like strangers. Her gaze was locked on me, eyes cold, daring me to challenge her. I gripped the papers tighter, feeling my pulse in my fingers. "Unlawfully?" My voice shook, not from weakness but fury. "Jenna, you left them on my porch, 10 years ago. 1 hour, you said. And then nothing." She crossed her arms, face impassive. "That's not how I see it." Hart interjected smoothly. "Your Honor will. My client is the biological mother. We filed for immediate custody. And, of course, the estate tied to their care will need review." His eyes flickered toward the kids for the first time, as if they were leverage rather than lives. Estate. The word ricocheted through me. 2 years earlier, our parents had passed, leaving the Maple Street house jointly to Jenna and me. A sturdy 3-bedroom brick, valued at $300,000 by county assessors, it had become our anchor. I had chosen to keep it for the children, a stable foundation in a world already too fragile. Now, suddenly, Jenna was back. And her timing was perfect, not for love, not for reconciliation, but for profit. She hadn't shown up for birthdays or school concerts. She hadn't even sent a postcard, but now that the market was hot and the deed still bore her name, she wanted in. I felt the kid's eyes drilling into my back, waiting for me to answer. I forced steadiness into my voice, though my heart quaked. "No one is taking you away. We are a family. And we'll prove what's true." I tantrabia some staged, and Amenarian's first in was mine time. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The legal papers spread out like a battlefield map. Every clause, every demand screamed betrayal. My dreams of finishing my nursing degree, of maybe traveling one day, shrank into the corners of the room. What stared back at me wasn't just Jenna, it was the system, cold and unforgiving, where biology often trumped loyalty. I picked up my phone and dialed the number scribbled on a flyer at the hospital bulletin board, Legal Aid of Idaho. A woman named Naomi Reed answered, her tone calm, professional, almost maternal. I told her everything, my words spilling like water breaking through a dam. She listened, then said, "You've got more than a story, Avery. You've got a case. We'll fight this." For the first time since that knock on the door, my chest eased slightly. But I also knew this wasn't just about paperwork. This was about history, about lies buried in diaper bags and text messages, about a decade of ordinary miracles now standing trial. As I folded the petition back into its envelope, one truth rang louder than all the legal jargon. Jenna wasn't after her children. She was after the house. The night after Jenna's return, I climbed into the attic of the Maple Street house, flashlight trembling in my hand. Dust swirled around me like restless ghosts, and I pulled down a battered cardboard box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were fragments of a life I hadn't meant to keep but never could throw away. Diaper bag receipts, pediatric clinic notes. These weren't just papers, they were proof. At the bottom of the box, wedged between a faded blanket and a stack of unpaid medical bills, I found it, the note. Crumpled, yellowed, the ink still smudged from that stormy night. "I'll be back soon. Thanks, A." My breath caught as I unfolded it, the fragile paper crackling. I remembered the way I had stared at those words 10 years earlier, heart pounding, realizing soon meant nothing. Now, in the harsh beam of my flashlight, it wasn't just a memory, it was Exhibit A. I searched further, determined. My old phone still sat in a drawer, long deactivated but miraculously functional when plugged in. On its cracked screen, I scrolled through text messages Jenna had sent between 2015 and 2016. "Send me $500 A. Don't ask questions." Another. "I need cash now, not calls." I snapped photos, each message like a knife carving her absence into permanence. These weren't the words of a mother longing for her children. They were the demands of someone who had walked away. The next day, I met with Naomi Reed, the attorney who had taken my case. She spread the note and text screenshots across her desk, her pen tapping in thought. "This paints a picture," she said. "But we'll need more to cut through her narrative." Her tone was steady, but her eyes carried urgency. "You said she never visited?" "Not once," I said, voice tight. "Not a birthday, not a Christmas, nothing." Naomi nodded, jotting notes. "Witnesses?" I thought of Betty Coleman, my old coworker. The woman who'd brought casseroles when I worked night shifts and folded laundry while kids ran wild through the living room. I called her that evening. "Betty, she's back. She's saying I stole them." Betty's laugh was bitter, sharp. "Stole them? After she dumped them on you like baggage? I'll testify, Avery. I'll tell the court what I saw. Those kids would have drowned without you." Her words steadied me, but fear still gnawed. Family courts are unpredictable, and I knew biology often shadowed truth. Then, unexpectedly, another door cracked open. I found Daniel Hayes, Jenna's ex-husband, in an old contact list buried in my email. My hands shook as I dialed. His voice, low and weary, answered after the third ring. "Avery?" "It's me," I whispered. "She's trying to take them back. For the house." A long pause, then a sigh that sounded like years of exhaustion. "I'm not surprised. She called me last month asking about property laws." His tone hardened. "I've got something you'll want." "What?" "A video. She sent it to me years ago, bragging about leaving the kids behind. Said she was starting over with someone else. I kept it." My pulse hammered. "Daniel, can I get it? I'll bring it," he promised. "If you need me, I'll testify." When I hung up, relief collided with dread. A video. Proof sharper than any paper or text. But I also thought of Ryan, Claire, Esther, and Noah. They didn't know this version of their mother, the one who had laughed while walking away from them. I had shielded them from her betrayal for years. If the court saw the video, they would see it too. The thought twisted in my gut. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Ryan was already researching custody law on his laptop, determination etched across his face. Claire's voice, once bright with song, had grown quiet. Esther scribbled angry sketches, dark lines tearing across her notebook. Noah asked softly, "Will we have to leave?" I kissed his forehead, whispering, "We're staying together, no matter what." In my room, I laid the note, the texts, and the promise of the video side by side. They were weapons in a war I never wanted but now had to fight. My sister had left me with children. Now she had returned for property, and between those two betrayals lay a decade of evidence paper cuts that bled truth. The day of the hearing arrived with the smell of polished wood and old whispers. Ada County Courthouse was packed tighter than I'd expected. Neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who'd followed the headlines about the sisters' fight crowded the benches. My palms slicked with sweat as I gripped the handle of the manila envelope, its contents humming like a live wire in my hand. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. "All rise." Judge Calvin Brooks entered, his robe sweeping the floor, his eyes already sharp. He carried the kind of authority that made your bones straighten involuntarily. "We're here to address custody of the minors, Ryan, Claire, Esther, and Noah Porter," he announced, "and matters tied to the Maple Street property." Stephen Hart, Jenna's lawyer, launched first. His words were smooth, polished, carefully rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Porter, is the biological mother. She left her children temporarily during a personal crisis, always intending to return. Miss Collins unlawfully withheld access for a decade." His voice echoed with confidence, as if facts bent to rhetoric. Then Jenna stood, hand resting lightly on the table as though the gesture might soften her edges. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "But I never stopped loving them. I only needed time. My sister shut me out. I'm here now to be their mother again." Gasps rustled through the gallery. Judge Brooks's face stayed unreadable, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at me. "Miss Collins?" Naomi, my lawyer, rose first. calm, firm. Your Honor, we have evidence to the contrary. She held up the crumpled note Jenna had left in 2015. The bailiff passed it to the bench. Judge Brooks read the words aloud. I'll be back soon. Thanks, eh? A murmur rippled. Naomi projected the text messages on a screen, Jenna demanding money, never asking about her kids. These aren't the words of a mother seeking contact, Naomi said. They are financial demands from someone who had abandoned her responsibilities. I felt Ryan's hand press against my shoulder, steadying me. For once, it was my nephew giving me strength. Judge Brooks nodded slowly. I'd like to hear from the children. Ryan stood first, 18, tall, his voice steady as stone. Aunt Avery has been our mom. She worked nights, paid for school, showed up to every event. Mom. He glanced at Jenna but didn't flinch. Mom wasn't there. Claire followed, clutching her choir ribbon like a lifeline. I don't want to go with her. Aunt Avery is our family. Her voice cracked, but her words struck harder than any gavel. Esther stepped up next, small but fierce. She left us. Aunt Avery loves us. Noah, the youngest, squeezed my hand before standing. His voice was soft but cut through the courtroom like a bell. I only know Aunt Avery. She's my home. The room went silent. Even Hart looked rattled. Jenna's face stiffened, eyes avoiding her children's gaze. Naomi leaned toward Judge Brooks. Your Honor, if I may, there's additional evidence. She gestured toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened. Daniel Hayes, Jenna's ex-husband, walked in, his steps slow but resolute. He held a small USB drive, his expression grave. The gallery buzzed. Jenna froze, her shoulders stiff. Your Honor, Naomi said, this witness has video evidence relevant to the case. The bailiff set up the screen. Daniel was sworn in, his voice low but firm. Years ago, Jenna sent me this video. I kept it. When the video played, the courtroom leaned forward as one body. Jenna's younger face filled the screen. Her hair loose, a drink in her hand. The backdrop, a dimly lit bar. Her laugh was sharp, careless. I'm done with the kids, she said. 4 is too many. I'm starting over. Avery can deal with them. I just need money to move on. The clip ended. Silence collapsed over the room. Then murmurs exploded, shocked, disgusted, pitying. Ryan's grip on my shoulder tightened. Claire's eyes welled with tears. Esther whispered, That's Mom. Noah looked down. His small fingers still latched to mine. Judge Brooks leaned forward, voice stern. Mrs. Porter, do you care to explain this? Jenna's face flushed crimson. She stammered, That was years ago. I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean it. Her words, flimsy, dissolved in the thick air. For 10 years, I had shielded the children from the rawness of her betrayal. Now, in a courtroom full of strangers, the truth blared on a screen. There was no unseeing it, no returning to the softer lies I had told to protect them. Judge Brooks's gavel came down like thunder. His voice was steady but final. The evidence is clear. Mrs. Porter abandoned her children. Full guardianship is granted to Miss Collins. A 7-year no-contact order is issued. Relief flooded me so hard I nearly collapsed. Behind me, Ryan gripped my shoulder. Claire let out a sob. Esther smiled faintly, and Noah whispered, We're staying with you, Mom. Across the aisle, Jenna slumped, her face pale, her attorney shoving papers into his briefcase. The gallery murmured pity from some, judgment from others. For me, there was no triumph, only exhaustion. Winning custody meant more responsibility, more sacrifice, but also more peace. The house on Maple Street wasn't just bricks and value, it was ours, carved by laughter and midnight tears. Weeks later, life returned to its rhythm. Ryan got his acceptance letter to Boise State. Claire's voice soared again in choir. Esther spun across the kitchen tiles, ballet shoes tapping. Noah scored his first soccer goal, racing home to tell me. These were the ordinary miracles we had fought for. Word spread about Jenna's downfall. Debts piling. Friends gone. Her new life collapsing. I didn't gloat. I felt only sorrow for the sister I'd lost. But I couldn't forgive her. Some choices carve scars too deep. As I tucked Noah into bed one night, he looked up at me, eyes wide. "We're okay now, right?" I brushed his hair back and whispered, "Better than okay. It is not what perfected to scream in. Because family isn't the blood that leaves, it's the love that stays."